Hello, everybody. It's Mike Bedford here, and your host of the Be Brilliant People podcast. I'm delighted that you could join us today and tune into this latest episode. I'm delighted to welcome a very special guest to the podcast today, Laurie Niles Hoffman. Hello, Laurie.
Hello, Mike. Thank you so much for having me. It truly is an honor. Thank you.
Oh no, it's fantastic, and I'm so glad that we were able to finally get together in person, virtually, as it were. For those that are watching that can see us, hi, and obviously for those that are listening into this, hi to you too. We're coming straight into your ears, quite literally, as Peter Kay said in his famous sketch. But yeah, I mean, what time is it where you are, Laurie? Tell us a little bit about where you are and what time it is where you are.
I'm in cold Toronto, Canada, and it's about 20 past 8 in the morning. So I think I'm 5 hours behind you. So we're just
Yeah.
getting started with our day, but we're getting snow. What can I say? It's Toronto in the winter.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. First of all, thank you so much for kind of joining us nice and early where you are. We're kind of like midday, mid early afternoon here in the UK. Not so much any snow here, just dull and grey as it usually is here in the UK. But you could send some snow our way. We do like a bit of snow in the UK, but we just don't get much of it.
We can send plenty. We can send plenty.
Please do. My kids would be ever so grateful. I'm sure. But yeah, no, thanks. And for the benefit of our listeners, we were chatting for quite a while before we even came onto the podcast, as is what tends to happen with most of my guests on this show as well, because we have so much to talk about. We end up kind of like doing a podcast before the podcast even goes live. And I was saying to Laurie, oh my God, I wish I'd have just hit record on this, because this is such a great conversation that no one's going to kind of hear apart from us. But it was great for us because we've kind of sort of known each other for some time now, haven't we, Laurie?
Yeah, we have. Yeah. It's sort of a parasocial but social relationship online.
Yeah. And Laurie's someone who I've really respected and admired for a long time. And particularly being, a former kind of head of learning and development and an L&D to the core, really, in terms of kind of like my professional interest when I was particularly working in the corporate space. Obviously, now I've moved into kind of the neurodiversity space and supporting organizations to really embrace and embed neurodiversity in their work places and to kind of disrupt the status quo. So I've brought along someone who I consider to be a bit of a disruptor today onto the podcast. Yeah, absolutely. For a bit of a chat about maybe some disruption and lots of other things beside. I'm sure that you, our listeners, will benefit greatly from listening to this conversation today. I know I always feel enriched when I talk to wonderful people, wonderful human beings like Laurie, and learn so much and have great conversations with. It's just an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast, Laurie. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, likewise. I've been a fan from afar. I think you and I spotted you out in the wild, so I was really keen to connect, and it's just an honor to be here. So thank you.
No, it's amazing. It's amazing. Well, I guess I've got a bit of an unfair advantage over our listeners straight away in terms of I know a little bit about you and what you do, Laurie. But for the untrained ears and for the viewers who are kind of watching us now, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I did spend about 20 years in corporate, becoming working with learning management systems, managing teams, working with companies to develop their edtech ecosystems and their learning strategies. But I got very frustrated with what was happening. I didn't feel we were really addressing problems. It felt we were doing the things that stakeholders were telling us to do, and we weren't helping that person at the other end of the screen or other end of the room. So I did a proverbial threw my toys out of the pram, and said, I'm going to start something on my own. And that was when I wrote an ebook called, very short ebook called Data-Driven Learning Design. And then I started to, work with companies who really wanted to do things differently about learning, who were concerned with actually upskilling employees, not just doing the compliance training and what everybody needed to learn. And those are the companies that I'm very attracted to. So Niles Nolan, we're a small little boutique agency. It's myself, my business partner, Amanda Nolan in Madrid. And then we also work with another woman, Catalina Schweniger, who's based out of the UK. And we work with CLOs sort of under the radar on what they really need to do to, design edtech that is inclusive, is also business driven, but is also going to help people. What we always like to think is, how do we help people stay relevant, lest they be made redundant? And for us, that's always the ethos behind everything that we do, is how do we help people stay relevant and thrive in this very changing environment? And if it doesn't do that, we don't want to do it.
No, and what you say there, and as an L&D, I totally resonate with the L&D side of that as well. But certainly, in terms of, I flip that around into what I do as well, the comparisons are about that kind of that building, really accessible, inclusive workspaces and places for everyone, where people can actually thrive and perform to the peak of their capabilities. Really, is a no-brainer for businesses, I think, as well. So I think, even though we're kind of operating in a slightly different but similar kind of space, and I feel like certainly I've gone much more back to my kind of like training sort of days a lot now, because there's so much is needed in this space, educational awareness, training. I think the parallels are quite similar in terms of obviously your mission, and in terms of what my mission is, to kind of like disrupt and change the workforce, and like you say, not just to whitewash people, which is kind of, I think, L&D certainly was guilty of just kind of like whitewashing people with pointless training in my time.
Click next to continue.
Yeah. But even in the space that I'm in, there's an argument that HR, ED&I teams and businesses whitewash people, and this is in organizations, not all organizations, because some do nothing, but in some organizations that are doing something, then potentially just whitewashing people once a year, like with an annual awareness campaign around neurodiversity. But then again, everyone kind of goes to that training or session or whatever awareness that HR and L&D or EDI and I have been frantically getting excited about designing and pulling together. They do it, everyone feels good, there's lots of great conversations, and everyone just goes back to the desk and nothing happens and nothing changes. Kind of feels like similar to kind of L&D in that respect.
I think a lot of times that happens in L&D, and that scares me, because I think like just the pace of change, even if we look at what's happening with AI and for people to keep up, it's near to impossible. And so how are we enabling those people? Or are we just satisfied that they can be left behind? I'm not satisfied with that. I'm really not satisfied with that. And I do hear some scary conversations with companies where it's basically to say, well, if they can't navigate and they can't find their way, then maybe they shouldn't be here. Right. And that's a very frightening conversation to hear, and one that I don't like, and I don't advocate for. It's not possible. We can't just simply say, these people don't deserve to be here if we're not giving them anything to help them stay current.
That resonates so much with what I do, I think, Laurie, particularly given that we know that a lot of neurodivergent people in the workplace don't get the right support, tools, resources, even as basic fundamentals as having the right conversations with someone. And you don't need a diagnosis to be able to thrive in the workspace. I think we talked earlier about kind of universal design principles, and how wouldn't it be wonderful if we just designed for the 100% rather than just designing for the 80% and neglecting the 20% of people that are in your workplace. And like you just said there, Laurie, are we saying then that the 20%, here go the neurodivergent people like myself, just have to get off the bus then because you can't really kind of fit in, you know? So if you don't fit in around here, you know, kind of ship out sort of thing. And how is that beneficial for anybody in terms of harnessing your talent that you're already sitting on, and also attracting new diverse talent to your business to create that kind of disruption and innovation and creativity that all businesses need right now? I'm not sure that helps anybody really.
No, it doesn't. And I mean, and you know, further to that, the conversation we had before the conversation we should have recorded, but we'll talk about it now. You know, even just basics like the open concept office, you know, and you know, or what has been called activity-based learning or activity-based working. You know, stuff like that. It's cost cutting. I mean, you can't tell me it isn't anything like that. But just the indignity of not even having a desk where you know where your Post-it notes and biros are, just to me seem absolutely ridiculous. But that's the plan for a lot of people, and it's just you have to be agile and you have to adapt to that. It's what if you need accommodations for where, you know, the desk height is, or where your screen height is, even just basics like that, you know, or, you know, can you allow people to wear headphones, or just there's so much. Why did we design it that way? I will never understand the open concept office. I never will. I never will.
I'm gonna get no arguments from me on this at all. As someone who absolutely abhorred open plan working, it filled me full of dread when I worked in the corporate space coming into, and that was the way everything was going before the pandemic hit, was more and more kind of open plan working. But as you said, what happens if you're like me, need to kind of have that solitary kind of like space where I can kind of like think, and I need quiet? And yeah, you could argue I could kind of like, you know, sit and put my headphones on and all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, you know, there's many myths and stereotypes around that kind of would suggest that, well, if Mike's kind of sat there with his headphones on, is he just kind of like chilling out, listening to Amazon Music or other platforms are available? But, you know, is he just kind of not working, and is he kind of just doing his own thing, and this is kind of like lazy and excuse, and he's just kind of like disconnecting and chilling out and listening to music? Actually, no, it's pivotal for me to be able to kind of survive in that environment, that I can kind of like isolate myself and be able to kind of put myself in a place where I can thrive. And yeah, I mean, open plan desk working, you call it that activity-based working, I don't think is conducive to supporting the 100 again, which we talked about. And I get that, you know, for some businesses that might be the way they've developed their business model, but I think you then have to build into that, don't you? Well, what do we need to do to kind of then create spaces where others can thrive who aren't going to thrive in that environment as well? So, for example, building in quiet zones and quiet spaces where like ND people like me and others can go hang out and do their thing away from the masses as well. You know, develop kind of communication methods to understand when it's okay and not okay to kind of like go disrupt that person when they're in the peak flow. You know, simple as like a traffic light system that kind of says do not disturb. I mean, so many basic things that don't need to cost a lot of money to kind of make these changes to make, you know, a more inclusive and accessible workplace for everybody. The myth again is another myth here, isn't it, Laurie, about kind of
it's money.
This is all going to cost a lot of money to do this. It's going to cost, so therefore we're not going to invest in this. It's again a myth. And if you took the time as an employer or as a leader to actually look into that and not work off assumptions and myths, actually, you know, we always talk about, particularly bringing it back to that kind of like HR and L&D space, about taking an evidence-based approach, right? Precisely. Well, that's exactly what this is. It's taking an evidence-based approach. If you kind of look and you gather your evidence, you know, and you know, and you know, advise anyone to kind of always do that anyway before you kind of embark on anything. You know, make sure you've got enough evidence behind you to kind of make sure that this is actually going to work, and that you're going to kind of, you know, actually target someone's needs, or you're going to make some kind of change that's going to matter to somebody or something. Gather that evidence, and then you can actually put in place systems and processes that can support people. It's not rocky science, this stuff.
It's not at all, and we have to, we're supposed to be outcomes driven. The thing is this is something I never understood, even in L&D, is that they would say, well, we expect 80% of people to pass and 20% to fail, and I was like, that's just a poorly designed test. If your course is designed, your learning is designed well, your test is designed well, there should be a very close to 100%. To me, why are you designing it so that people are going to fail? That's just tripping people up. But funny thing that I saw, back to the open concept office, that didn't age well in the time of COVID. And I once went into one where it had plexiglass. It was all open, but we had plexiglass little little cubicles around. And I just thought, wow, just redesign the whole damn thing.
just actually take a step back and look at this and kind of think. just kind of think to yourself, really? And you quickly realize that it's nonsense, right? It's nonsense.
Complete nonsense. Yep.
It's and the thing about inclusion is often a word that gets bandied about, isn't it? Quite liberally as well. But the thing about inclusion is it really does benefit everybody as well, because you don't necessarily have to be neurodivergent to want to benefit from working in a quiet space as well. So again, it's designing for the 100%, isn't it, rather than designing for a proportion of your workforce, and by proxy then excluding the other percentage of people that are already working for you. And of course, if you exclude people and marginalize people and discriminate against people, whether that's intentional or not, the risk is you either lose them. It could be costly because ultimately it could affect their well-being and mental health, and it could end up costing you as an employer to kind of, resolve that. And not to mention the reputational damage that it's going to have, and the impact on your workforce and culture. But I think when you talk about reputational damage as well, it's thinking about, well, reputational is how is that perceived by the outside as well. You got to remember that a lot of your customers are going to potentially be different as well, and they're going to want to see that you're doing the right thing as well for your people. Otherwise, why should I buy off you as well? So I think it's thinking about things more holistically, isn't it? If you're a leader in this space, and how you're designing things, and how you're kind of looking to make changes and create accessible and inclusive workplaces, spaces, training, development, whatever it is, it has to be designed for the 100.
I completely agree. And I think also too, I've had the privilege of working in some workspaces where, even people who are quote unquote neurotypical, they don't like the way people are othered. They don't want to be a part of that. They see that, and they're not going to want to be a part of that environment. I've seen people leave those where they've just said, no, this is not something I want to participate in, or be a party to. Yep.
Me.
Holding up your head.
You're talking. You're talking to one right now, Laurie. I mean, I spent 25 years in environments that weren't suited to me and how I needed to work and to thrive. And eventually, I just figured I had enough. and kind of,
you're a different person now, like being out of it.
I'm so much happier. I can't tell you, I feel free. I feel liberated, and you often hear the kind of cliches of kind of how you feel you're not kind of like bonded to some kind of like servitude to the corporate world anymore. For me, it wasn't that. For me, it was just about being able to thrive and kind of have a routine and a way of working that enabled me to do that. And now I can completely do that. I can work how I want. I can work when I want. I still get shit done. Otherwise I wouldn't survive as a business. I mean, the logic behind, the evidence behind that is, well, I'm thriving as a business, right? If I wasn't, then I wouldn't get shit done. But in the workplace, that just didn't fly. That just did not fly. I had to conform to that neuronormative standards, else ship out, basically. Conform or ship out were my options. And as someone who can't conform because those neuronormative rules had such an adverse effect on me, then that's not going to work either. So my only options are to ship out, really, and then to kind of establish my own rules, my own boundaries, my own ways of working. And for me, I've never thrived more since leaving that corporate world.
which is absolutely, it's absolutely fantastic. And I think sometimes we're fed that narrative that this is what you need to do. This is the right way, and
Yeah,
this is the direction you're supposed to go.
absolutely.
I know when I left, my corporate life, my parents were positively freaking out, and fair enough,
Yeah, yeah.
because it's different. My father, he worked in insurance, and then he worked in a bank, and that was his career path, and he
Hmm.
did very well, and that was great for him, and he was,
Yeah,
but it's not, I think now, especially in some ways, I think the pandemic opened up a lot more possibilities where people had to think a little bit differently, and people could,
yeah.
vice versa, people were more accepting of people doing things differently because we all had to be different. I just hope we don't lose that momentum.
I think the pandemic opened a Pandora's box
Agreed.
for people. It certainly did for me. And when I took a
Mhm.
look inside that box, I liked what I saw. If I'm
Good.
being honest with you, I got a
Mhm.
taste of how things could be. And for a little while,
Mhm.
employers kind of seemed to get it.
Yep.
And they're kind of like, oh yeah, this whole kind of like remote thing and doing things differently and working more flexibly is a good thing. But sure as shit, once the pandemic ended, they
Mhm.
wanted the control back. They wanted you back in that office, and
Right.
working remotely was a luxury, right? A luxury. But for a lot of people, it wasn't. It was just it enabled them to kind of do things that they couldn't do before, and enabled them to thrive and to participate and to engage. I've never engaged with more people globally than what I have done since we went virtual. I've got to be honest with you. It's not been a barrier for me. It goes back to that same what we were saying earlier about how we felt like we've known each other forever, right? But we've never met. But so what? Is meeting someone in real life? Is that just a kind of like normal way of kind of being and thinking? And if you're not normal, then, and I say that again in quotes,
Yeah.
normal,
Yeah.
then how does that kind of stack up?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I mean, prior to the pandemic, I'd go on site with clients and whatnot, and just the meeting dynamics to see. There's a lot of things, who sits in the front of the room and who
Yeah,
sits beside
yeah.
whom and all of that. Just when you strip that away and everyone was just a square on a Zoom call, it was
It was
very
equal,
interesting
wasn't
to
it?
see how the power dynamics changed quite a
Yeah,
bit.
yeah, yeah. Yes,
And
absolutely.
also too, what I really liked, and I saw this with a lot of companies because I would have privy to their Slack channels or Teams,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, that people who maybe had English as a second language, or who were, needed more time to process, the fact that they could do that by typing and
Yeah,
to not have to respond in the second. It was
right.
so interesting to see how the dynamics shifted. And I don't want to say just power, because that's a bad word, but
Yeah,
meaning just the domination maybe is a better term for that. And I also know on the flip side, there were people who were so used to that other environment that really struggled in
yeah,
this. What do you mean? How do I talk louder? What do I do to be that square? So it
yeah,
was just, I mean in some ways it was a very cruel experiment, but we had to do it. But it
yeah.
was just very fascinating for me to watch how teams all of a sudden changed the way that they just even connected with each other.
I totally agree. I think it was perhaps
Mhm.
the biggest social experiment in history, right?
Yeah, yeah.
In terms of people, and it's kind of, I think it's forever changed the way we engage, interact, and the way we do things. And there's a term that is often bandied about over in the UK, called
Mm.
leveling up.
Yeah,
And for me, what the pandemic did, obviously there was many
mm.
negative things about the pandemic,
Of
but there was
course.
also some positives,
Mhm.
as well. And for me, a lot of what we've talked about there were a real kind of leveler for a lot of
Mhm.
people. Like you just said
Yes.
there, I mean, I saw the shifts to kind of how we engage with people, like you say about the kind of the dynamics of social communication and things like that shifted, which played into a very inclusive and accessible way for a lot of people. How people kind of applied for jobs and were interviewed for jobs all
Mhm.
changed.
Yeah.
All those kind of things, and some of that's kind of stayed. But I think there was such a fear of letting go of all of that, from the neuronormative status quo, that the reaction was to kind of try to bring a lot of that back under control after the
Yeah.
pandemic. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people. like me and others who kind of like resisted that and kind of felt like, actually, you know what, I don't want to go back to that way of doing things. That didn't work out for me. I might have done it for a long time. That doesn't mean I were happy, or that doesn't mean that I were thriving. So for me, that kind of, I kind of took a look inside that Pandora's box and decided I wanted to jump inside it. I kind of didn't want to go back out and go back to what was, because what wasn't working for me.
We call that the opting out, and just saying, this is not, this is something, that I'm going to, explore, something different. And I think companies, and also I see though on the flip side, and this is what makes me very nervous, and we touched on this before, was, some companies are trying to save money and whatnot, just even in recruiting or even in learning and all that, using a lot of AI, to do those assessments.
Everything's AI, no?
Everything's AI, and okay, fine. But, I see things like, you don't even interacting with a human. When you have your first interview, it's a video assessment. And they're looking for, and I mean, okay, so even if you say, okay, neurodiversity, because it's assessing for, it's weeding them out, let's be honest. That's what it's looking for. But also too, do you have a stable internet connection? Do you have a quiet place that you can actually do this? Well, what if you're a single mother and you have things, what if you're speaking English as a second language? There are so many things that it's not taking into account. And I'm hearing, from a lot of people in the space who I talk to, that they were like, whoa, no, we're going to take that into account. We're going to build all of that in. Well, I'm not seeing it. That's what makes me very, very nervous, or I see technology saying, we're going to use this technology to teach people to be, normal. And that scares me on a whole other level, we talked about, even like when, I have Grammarly installed, and it gets rid of all my superlatives. It gets rid of everything that's decorative about my language. Because I love to write, because that's what it's doing. And I get it. If you don't want to run on sentence, that's fine. But I'll die on the hill of an Oxford comma, whether you like it or not. So, but that's not what Grammarly is doing. So these tools make me very nervous sometimes.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that you've mentioned that, and about how, I guess the thing with AI is it's as good as kind of like the information that it's provided with, as well. And I think if we're trying to create a tool that tries to neurotypicalize everything, I think we're setting ourselves, again, we're not designing for the 100 again. Now it goes back to this point about universal design principles. Well, AI is not excluded from that either. And and it worries me, it really does. It's a really red flag for me that, particularly in kind of like that recruitment and acquisition space, if there's a program that's asking you to kind of like make eye contact and all this kind of stuff, and that it's by proxy excluding and as you say, weeding out a huge proportion of people who that just does not come naturally to. And to do that is just completely going against who they are as a person. It doesn't mean that they're any less suitable or capable to do that job. And why are we measuring people about how much they're staring into your eyeballs as a starter?
And how do you do that?
I've never understood that concept ever. I don't get that as a concept ever. My brain's very kind of logical. It thinks about things in a very logical way. It doesn't. If things don't make sense, it needs to understand why something is, and it wants to unpack it and unpick it and kind of dissect it. And if someone tells me something I don't understand it, then you're pretty damn sure I'm gonna dissect that with you. And if you can't give me that answers, then I know that's just a load of bollocks. Excuse my French.
Oh no, swear away. And agree. And then I also wonder, is this now any different than when they used to make us do Myers-Briggs tests or personality testing? It's doing it with AI now.
we like to reinvent the wheel, don't we? Right? So hey, this thing it particularly was broke, in my opinion. These kind of like personality profiling type things. Why don't we just apply AI to that now, as well, and and keep breaking people and keep making people think that they're the problem. Actually, that there's a reason why they don't fit in, and they're the problem. We don't want to go there. I'm sure that that's not the right thing to do. So I think I'm with you on that. Though. I think there's a red flag there for me about AI and about how inclusive and accessible that is going to be. I think you're telling me there that AI, I've seen it myself. I use Chat GPT like the next person. Sometimes it's a helpful tool to get me.
I love Team Perplexity. I love Perplexity. Everyone uses Chat GPT. I'm Perplexity. I don't know why, but anyway.
Whatever it is, sometimes it's helpful to kind of just get off the starting blocks, and it can help do that as well. But I don't want that to kind of like rip apart who I am and the message I'm trying to get across by telling me that that's wrong and it's not normal enough for someone, because we need to encourage more diversity of thought. I think particularly in the kind of times that we're living in, we need to kind of be able to look at things from a different perspective, I think, now, to kind of like take on some of the challenges that we've all got. I'm going to get deep here, but kind of like some of the big problems that we've got as a species are not going to be resolved by kind of doing things as we've always done them. In my view, we're gonna need people who think about things differently to come to the table and to offer a different way of thinking, a different way of doing things, because what we're doing clearly just isn't working in many aspects of how we live and operate as human beings as well. So we shouldn't be looking to drive down creativity, innovation, and diverse ways of thinking. We should be looking to drive that up, and we should be looking to use tools like tech and AI as a great way of doing that as well. So I think this is definitely a wake-up call there for people to be aware of that. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of kind of neurodivergent people who are going to be in some way involved in that tech space, and who are going to be in some way involved in kind of writing the programs and the algorithms or whatever that kind of like drive those things as well. So let's make sure that the 100% is represented, not just in terms of kind of like the user testing, in terms of like the design of those tools as well. It needs to be a kind of holistic, I think, design to tech and to tools going forward as well, because it is, as much as we kind of banging on about AI and things like that, it definitely is going to be, tech is going to be the future. But don't forget tech as the great power to, if we talk about kind of like the typical or normal, the normie kind of way of doing things, it's very kind of like linear, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Tech has the power to kind of automate a lot of that. What it doesn't at this point, I think, have the power to do is to kind of like automate the kind of the diverse kind of non-linear way of thinking. And I think for me, it's that's the future. I think is diverse thinking and non-linear thinking.
I would agree, and it's interesting because I see my friends' kids and whatnot and how they interact with technology, and they are using it for good. I think corporate has stalled on something, so they're always trying to solve a business problem, and it's interesting when I see some of these, especially teens, when they're using this tech, they're also trying to solve human problems. They're trying to solve things for themselves, and they interact with it very, very differently than what. And that's why I'm always fascinated with a lot of the B2C solutions, for, using AI and how they're building learning, for example. Some of them are bad, don't get me wrong, but some of them are really looking at learning about you and how you learn and playing that back to you in a way that's producing outcomes. I think there's a lot of value in that. It's not trying to apply a template to you, which saying you will learn this way. This is the way thou shalt learn. It's saying, wait a minute, you didn't quite catch that. We're going to do this and present it in this way and see if that catches on. Okay, that didn't, but we're going to. So those are ways that I'm also seeing that I think AI can. There's ways it can be done for good. Absolutely,
I think AI definitely can be a tool for good, and I think it's not going away. That's everything we see now is AI this, AI that, and every single software platform's looking to embed AI now, right?
Then they've all added .ai to their URLs.
Do you want AI to write this for you type of thing? Even on LinkedIn now, they've kind of built that in as well, haven't they? Do you want AI to write this post for you? I'm like, I really don't. I'm still at a point where I don't think AI can kind of really kind of tap into what I want to say, if I'm being honest with you. So I think, it has its limits, but it has its uses, but I think it has its limits as well. But I'm interested about how you think, you're in EdTech and things like that. Then how do you think we really make sure that the future, the kids who are our future, who are going to come through, are going to be kind of like pioneering and the disruptors of the future. How do we teach them in school to kind of make sure it's ethical, inclusive, accessible, in terms of like the we see more and more, aren't we, in education, about teaching kids about coding and things like that now, and I think that's only going to grow. I think as my kids go into, like, you know, high school education, coding is probably just going to be part of the curriculum, you know. But how do we kind of make sure that we don't, as we've done in education, especially in the UK, I don't know, it's like in Canada, but we have a very kind of outdated Victorian-based education system that teaches people in a certain way to kind of go on and have a certain career, and that's how you should just be. It kind of tries to normalize you and kind of set you on your way in a kind of very normal, typical kind of a way. How do we avoid that then from a tech and AI perspective, thinking about kind of like the future, and, you know, how do we make sure that the future is accessible and inclusive for everybody?
Well, this is one way that I actually, and I never thought I would say this. This is actually, I think, a way that capitalism is going to come back and eat that snake's tail, because there's so many tools available. Yeah, there's so many tools available and out there, and so many companies right now who are trying to make a quick buck on education. EdTech's a big one, right? And if those solutions don't work, or they aren't behaving in a way that's producing results, especially with young people, they're finicky. Think about how they're, you know, the attention span, the idea that I will hop and hop and hop to something new, they'll dump it. And they'll dump it very, very quickly. And you won't see that. I know a lot of people right now are trying to build ed tech, you know, for students. And if it doesn't land, it doesn't work, it's gone. So I think there's a really big, which I think is very interesting. Now, you also though have to look at the people who are buying sort of tech for, you know, whole education systems within schools and universities. They're not always tuned into some of those things. But what I also find is that if they put something in place that doesn't work, kids will find another way around it that will work for them. And I find that really also quite fascinating. I mean, we do it too. Oh, if everyone's on Slack, you can guarantee that there's a WhatsApp conversation happening somewhere. You know, and we always say too, if there's a WhatsApp conversation, there's an even smaller subset of that WhatsApp conversation talking about the WhatsApp conversation. But it's not just about, you know, communication. It's also too about the tech that they'll use, and they will find ways that will bring themselves together. And that gives me a lot of hope and promise. I also think this generation coming up is far more and hyper aware of how their data is being used than I think we were naive to it. We were very naive to how much, because let's face it, any tech, if it's either earning by gathering information or marketing to you. Those are the two things that it's earning money.
Harvesting.
It's harvesting, exactly. So, and it's a combination too of the two, because if it has a lot of data about you, then it can get the right ads to target to you, et cetera, et cetera. In ed tech, for you know, 18 and under, or for K-12, you can't use that type of revenue model. It's going to be about usage. But also too, children are very, very aware, and when they're being marketed to, and where their information is going, in a way that I think we just didn't comprehend, because it moved so fast for us. We didn't realize that if you go on Facebook and you put your name, date of birth, and your country, and your and all of your interests,
it's profiling us.
It's profiling us, right? And remember those you know, it'd say, you know, answer these 12 questions about yourself. You know, where were you born? Where was your father born? Those are all just banking information. You know, really into it. So that gives me hope. But I think it also comes down to the government bodies who are looking at ed tech and what investments they make. You know, in Germany, I know, for example, they don't allow a lot of our standard tools like Microsoft Teams, because it doesn't meet their data privacy standards. I think that's a good thing.
No, that's
a very long-winded answer, but I think the kids are all right. I think they're far more aware than we were. I
see that. And as a parent of two young children myself, I see even at this age how tech savvy they already are, and you know, they do innovate already with tech to kind of like find solutions. Like, say if it ain't working, they can find a workaround and a way around. So I think from that perspective, I think you're right, and that does give me hope for our future as well. I wondered if you had any thoughts about how we can use tech, ed tech, AI, then to better support neuro inclusion. What are your thoughts around that?
I think demanding it of the vendors, not accepting quick fixes, and they won't. I work with a lot of vendors. Some of them are great. We really are fussy about who we work with, but it is about challenging them, and it's about ensuring too that they themselves have that on their radar, and that they're not just designing for themselves. And that's a huge bias that can happen, because they often won't see that, and it doesn't. The downstream impact isn't to them. So I think it's about challenging them. When I work with CLOs, when they're putting together RFPs for tech, it's like, okay, how are we going to put inclusivity in here? And because that is one way that if a vendor sees that they can't tick off a box on an RFP, then they know they don't get the business. And I hate to put it to that. I hate to make it a numbers game, but that's the only way you can fight some of this. I'm just being totally blunt. So I think it's putting that pressure on to say this is something that we expect as a norm for when we see. We want that 100% design. We don't. The first question that I always ask is, is this inclusive design? Is this accessible for anybody using technology if they're visually impaired, for example? And it's always and I'm like, I don't want what are we building towards?
Yeah, so the buyers. So in this case, I guess if we're talking about a workplace context, the employers, so like the CLOs that you're talking about there, whoever's kind of got the responsibility for buying and has got the budget, they need to understand the why, don't they, and the what's. And if they're going into that, and again, just for example, buying an LMS suite full of content or whatever, and it's not inclusive or accessible for people, then you're just wasting your money, because again, you 20%. I'd argue it's a lot higher than that, but 20% of your workforce, possibly higher, aren't going to engage with that. It will be higher than that, even from the neurotypical folks in your workforce, but certainly a quarter of your workforce are just not going to engage with that. So it's a waste of money straight away. If you're not kind of creating or buying, even if you're buying in technology and learning for your workforce, if it's not accessible and inclusive for everybody, then they're not going to use it. It's as simple as that. We're designed to know what is going to work for us and what isn't going to work for us, and where we don't, like those kids, we'll avoid it and we'll jump on something else. We'll find something that does work for us as well. So I guess it goes back to, and I think this resonates in terms of, again, what I do, is it's that educational piece, isn't it, for the C-suite to understand how important it is to make sure that you are actually, designing for 100% of your workforce, and how you go about that in terms of not just from a learning perspective, but from a cultural perspective, the whole of how things are done in your organization. If you're not doing that, then you're excluding a quarter of your workforce straight away, and that's not good for you. It's not good for business. It's not good for your people, and that's going to ultimately affect your bottom line ultimately as well.
Completely. And I think, and the two things there, the first one is that's why we need to see diversity in that C-suite, so that they will raise those issues, because if they, that's absolutely critical. And then the second one, I do this test quite a bit, where, they'll be looking at a technology solution, and I'll look at them, and I know this is loaded with bias, but I asked the question anyways. I said, would you, given the choice between ChatGPT, Google, YouTube, would you choose this platform to learn on? Would you choose this content to learn from?
Yeah.
And that's when you see sort of this deer in the headlights look.
Yeah.
And I'm like, because you are the audience for this. It's I hate when we use the word learner. It's like, no, these are your colleagues. These are they're people you work with. Do you think they're going to use this? Will it be effective for them? And again, I know that opens up a lot of bias, but it's just an initial taste to sort of say, have a think about this. Do you want a video auto-generated AI avatar video talking at you for 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Because it's cheap to produce.
Yeah. No, I think you're definitely right. There needs to be a massive amount of challenge given to like your senior leaders in your C-suite, because if they're not challenged, then they'll just do what they've always done. Right, and again, that's just going to then reinforce the status quo, which we don't want to reinforce the status quo. We want to break the status quo, and want to create spaces where everyone can thrive, because that's just better for everybody.
Exactly.
And I think you touched on a really good point there about, you know, if you can't see it, you can't be it as well. And obviously, given that neurodivergent people, it's, you know, invisible. You know, so that you know, I still feel applies, because there's a great responsibility there for the many neurodivergent leaders and C-suite members out there who are neurodivergent, who don't feel safe to come out and kind of share that they are. It's a blocker. Is that because if you're a leader and you're responsible for people, what is one quick, easy way that you can help create permission for people to feel safe? And I'm not talking about bringing 100% of yourself to work and things like that, because we know that that's a fallacy anyway. I'm talking about creating psychological safety for people so that they can thrive and that they're not afraid of being themselves at work, and also not afraid of asking and reaching out for the support that they need to be able to thrive. One easy way to do that is for leaders to come out and to actually, you know, say, for example, look, I'm dyslexic or I'm autistic, and you know, I'm sharing this with you because I want to create a space where everyone can thrive as well. And by me doing this, I believe that this will help others as well. It's a really brave, vulnerable space for leaders to actually to go into. But I think for me, it feels like that's a real critical missing gap right now as well, because we just know that 25% of all senior leaders are going to be on the spectrum somewhere as well. So, you know,
and they're afraid. They're afraid to disclose
and if they're afraid, what message does that send throughout the whole organization then? You know, fear creates fear, right? So if your most senior leader in your organization is afraid to kind of, you know, come out and be upfront about who they are, then why the hell am I going to do that if I'm working in your organization? Again, it's not rocket science, isn't this stuff? But that's the way to create change. It takes a brave leader to kind of be able to do that. But that's the sort of leadership I think we need in this space to be able to create change right now as well.
I agree. I would also flip it too, that it takes the acceptance for that person, that it doesn't need to be so brave to do, that they know they're going to be accepted if that if they come out with that because you know, it's one thing to say that person, you know, should you know, be free to disclose, and that's, you know, it's a brave thing to do, but vice versa, they know that that's going to be okay to do.
Yeah, and they're going to receive the full support of the wider senior leadership team. And actually, it's not going to be seen as something that's quite alien. It's going to be seen as something, well, how wonderful is this that we've got this dynamic, you know, diverse way of thinking in our senior leadership team. And again, that's going to permeate then throughout your entire workforce. And that's a great way to start, isn't it? To start from the top. But again, you know, you're right. If it isn't safe to do that, then that person is not going to do that. But I'd be looking introspectively about, well, what does that say about my organization and my culture and my organization as well? And that permeates, doesn't it, then through all of the organizations, all the systems, the processes, the different areas of your business as well. You know, that change starts from the top and then permeates its way through.
I would completely agree.
Yeah. I think we could talk forever, couldn't we? I'm mindful we're already kind of hitting nearly 50 minutes as well, and my experience tells us that listeners probably only stay somewhere between 30, 45 minutes or something for peak engagement. And I no, honestly, I could talk to you forever, and we had a good half an hour, I think, before we even came on the podcast as well, didn't we? But listen, I think again, just to kind of say thank you so much for coming onto the podcast, and for just being so open and kind of like, you know, talking and sharing and getting involved in this conversation. I think it's really helpful, and I really hope that our listeners benefit from kind of listening in to this. Is any kind of final thoughts or anything you might want to share from our conversation? Any final reflections?
I think first of all, thank you for having me. I really, really appreciated this conversation. I think, like I said, we could talk for hours. I think I'd like to end that, you know, I think we have to be hopeful. I hope that for that, you know, in the future, this isn't a hill to climb, that it's just a norm. I hope we get to that space. And I do want to remain hopeful with that. I do.
Yeah, no, it's a nice way to end. And thank you for sharing that with us. And you get back to your snow now, and your and your day. You've got a full day ahead, and we're just thinking I've got about another hour before I go get the kids and do the school run. So we flip that dynamic around.
Well, thank you so much again, Mike. I appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation, Laurie. I've really enjoyed it, and yeah, thanks for being our guest today on the Be Brilliant People podcast.
Thank you.
Take care, and thanks for listening. And thanks for listening, people. And we'll see you again on the next episode of the podcast. Take care. Bye for now.